You're probably sitting there scrolling through a dozen projector listings, wondering if any of them will actually live up to the hype without emptying your wallet, right? I get that hesitation. You've probably heard the buzz about laser projectors promising endless life and a crisp image. But the last thing you want is to spend a few $100s on something that looks great on paper and then turns out to be a compromise you can't live with in your living room. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's talk through why the Optoma GT1090HDRx might be the right fit for your setup, and where it could fall short for others. First off, the biggest draw for most people looking at the GT1090HDRx is the short throw design. If you've ever tried to mount a traditional projector and found yourself needing a whole wall of distance just to get a decent screen size, this model flips that on its head. You can sit just a few feet away from the wall and still get a 100-inch image, which is a game changer for smaller apartments or rooms where you can't dedicate a whole wall to a dedicated home theater space. I've seen folks set this thing up on a coffee table in a living room that doubles as a gaming zone during the day and a movie room at night, and the fact that you don't need to run a long cable run or buy a ceiling mount makes it surprisingly low effort. Now, the laser light source is where the no-lamp promise really shows its teeth. Most projector lamps need to be swapped every couple of thousand hours, which can add up in cost and inconvenience. The GT1090HDRx uses a laser that Optoma rates for about 30,000 hours of operation, effectively meaning you could run it every night for years without ever worrying about a bulb replacement. That translates into real savings if you're the type who watches a new release every week or runs the projector for background TV while you work from home. It also means the brightness stays consistent over the lifespan. You won't notice a dimming effect after a few years, something that's hard to ignore when you're trying to enjoy HDR content in a bright room. Speaking of brightness, the projector pushes out roughly 4,200 lumens, which is higher than many competing home theater lasers in this price range. In practice, that means you can actually turn on the lights during a family movie night and still see a vivid image without the washed-out look that plagues cheaper units. I've heard from a couple of people who tried the same model in a sunlit kitchen and were surprised that the picture held up well enough to watch cooking shows without pulling the curtains. That said, the image does still benefit from some ambient light control. You won't get the same depth as a dedicated darkroom cinema, but you also won't need to black out the whole house. If you're chasing 4K HDR, the GT1090HDRx does accept a 4K HDR signal, which is a big plus if you have a streaming device or a next-gen console that can feed it. The catch is that the native panel resolution isn't true 4K, it's a 1080p DLP chip that upscales the incoming signal. For most viewers, the upscaled image looks sharp enough, especially on a 100-inch screen where the pixel density is still decent. However, if you're a pixel purser who wants every line of a native 4K display, you might notice a slight softness compared to a true 4K projector or a high-end TV. In everyday use, especially for movies, games, and sports, the upscaled HDR does a respectable job, delivering vibrant colors and decent contrast, but the real 4K detail isn't there. One practical strength that tends to get overlooked is the ease of connectivity. The unit comes with a decent selection of HDMI inputs, plus a USB port for media playback, so you can hook up a Blu-ray player, a gaming console, or even a laptop without needing a separate switch. The menu system is fairly intuitive, and you can quickly toggle between picture modes for cinema, gaming, or sports. The built-in speaker isn't meant to replace a sound system, but it's adequate for a quick movie if you're on a budget and haven't yet invested in a soundbar or AV receiver. Now, where does it stumble? Noise level is the first thing that pops up in a few user comments. Because it's a laser projector, the fan has to work harder to keep the engine cool, and while it's not deafening, it does produce a soft whirring that becomes noticeable in a completely dark room. If you're planning on a midnight horror marathon and you're sensitive to background hum, you might want to add a bit of ambient sound or consider a projector with a quieter cooling system. Another point is the throw distance flexibility. While the short throw lens is great for tight spaces, it also means you have a very narrow sweet spot for placement. Move the projector a foot closer or further, and you'll see noticeable keystone.